Let's get talking now as the Naira redesign policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria continues to gather momentum, hereby causing severe hardship and frustration to the masses and the business community at large. The Supreme Court, in an unanimous ruling on Wednesday, restrained the federal government from suspending the deadline for acceptance of old Naira notes as legal tender in the country. However, mixed reactions have continued to trail yesterday's decision of the Apex Court to temporarily halt the move to phase out the use of old 200 Naira, 500 Naira, and 1,000 Naira banknotes from circulation from February 10th. While some senior lawyers, private sector players, international community, and some politicians backed the decision of the Supreme Court, some civil societies faulted the verdict of the court. Nigerians, as well as businesses across the country, have been experiencing social economic disruption and inconvenience for the past few weeks due to the Naira and fuel scarcity. Joining me live in the studio to look at this issue surrounding the Naira redesign policy and the Central Bank of Nigeria, he is the Chief Executive Officer, the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf. It's good to have you in the studio. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure to lose. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I read through the press release yesterday, immediately after that the declaration by the court. But I would ask you first, what is your reaction to that? And do you think it will possibly restore that normalcy that we expect?
I think so. Because the situation is becoming increasingly aggravated. The citizens are becoming very restive. And the evidence is all over the place. The cash situation is not improving. If anything, it's already getting worse. We are seeing situations where many banks are not even opening at all because the safety of even the bank staff is now at risk. I saw a video, I'm sure you two saw it, where banks that have to be scaling the fence to get out of the bank premises. That is how bad the situation is. And the situation is that intense because people feel that what has happened is very unjust and very unfair. I don't want to say it is wicked or insensitive. Because this is people's money.
Yes.
It is their money. It is not an overdraft. It is not a loan. They are not begging you for anything. What they want is access to their money. And now it has become almost impossible for them to access money. And some of this cash that has been locked up in the banking system, people use it for their day-to-day living, for their families, transportation, things that they use on day-to-day basis. That is one set of people. The other set are people whose working capital have been locked up. And the way it is with the SMEs, micro enterprises, informal sector. They use their cash as the working capital. So if we had a central bank instruction that they should come up with this cash for purposes of exchanging for new ones, they have deposited these monies. Now you are not giving them back the new one. They don't have access to the old one. We asked them to go to the ATM. They couldn't access these funds in the ATM. And to make matters even worse, even the online platform that the citizens were asked to go to were also already congested. So what we are seeing is the strangulation of the economy and strangulation of very important segments of the economy. The trade sector, the agri sector, and the entire chain, and to some extent the transportation sector. These sectors are very, very important because they account for a very large percentage of our GDP and of employment. And more importantly, the vulnerable segments of the economy, this is where they play. This is where they do their own economic activities. So the harm that has been done is enormous. So that explains all the anger, all the pain, and all of that, even though some people are trying to politicize it. But this is something that is evident. I mean, you go to bank locations, you can see how angry people are. It's not the politician that asked them to go, that is instigating that kind of thing. So it's very, very unfortunate and very sad that when we see our fellow citizens going through this kind of anguish, hardship, pain, and yet we are pretending that this is just political, that some people are making. I mean, it's very sad. So the pronouncement of the Supreme Court has brought a lot of relief. And my expectation is that, I mean, we are in a country governed by law. Both the president and his agents are sworn to uphold the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. Even though this is an interim injunction, but it behoves on all the key agencies of government to quickly comply with this ruling, pending the hearing of all the issues around it. So it has brought a lot of calm and things to. But it has to translate
by the Attorney General.
And that is still an objection. Okay. But in the meantime, there has to be a compliance. Because we are not talking now about a high court or federal, we are talking about the Supreme Court. And we are talking about a unanimous decision by all the judges of the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court must have seen some very strong merit in the case that have been brought before them, especially from a public interest point of view. That, in my view, is why the restraining order was granted. And I think it's good for our economy.
The big question many are asking is, does it look like the money mopped up and the money released, there wasn't data check or there were no findings? Something actually went wrong somewhere during this process. Because some saying the CBN running after bank managers now and all of that, that wouldn't have been the way to go. Something is really wrong about, is it that the monies are not available, or what could be the problem?
You see, we need to interrogate the assumptions that underpins this policy. There are two components of the policy. There is the redesigning of the currency. Then there is the mopping up of cash. Those are the two components. And from what I'm beginning to see, the redesigning of the currency notes was aimed at mopping up cash. Because the CBN has said repeatedly that there was too much cash outside the banking system. And from an economic theory and empirical study point of view, these are some of the assumptions that we need to interrogate. Because you are talking about the crisis that has taken place and whether there was no due diligence in terms of studies and things like that. Very important policy matters like this should be based on evidence, should be based on data, and to some extent should also be informed by basic economic principles, especially within the space of monetary economics. Now, the CBN is saying that 85% of cash is outside the system. My submission is that cash is a payment instrument. Payment instruments are supposed to reside with people who are making payments. So, cash is not supposed to be within the banks. The bulk of cash in any system is supposed to be outside the banking system. So it is not anything unusual at all if 85% of cash is outside the banking system, because that is where the cash should be.
Yeah.
It's just as saying that 80% of checkbooks are outside the banking system. Where are they supposed to be? They are supposed to be with people who will use them.
Yeah.
Just like say 80% of ATM cards
are with individuals.
They are supposed to be within. So cash is a payment instrument. It's supposed to be outside the banking system. The only thing we can worry about in monetary management is when you look at the ratio of your cash to your money supply. If the ratio is too high, you cannot begin to worry about monetary policy effectiveness. But if you look at the ratio in Nigeria, cash is 2.6 trillion naira. Money supply is 52 trillion naira. So we are talking about just about 5%. So cash is just about 5% of total money. So it's not anything to lose sleep about for those who understand monetary economics. Secondly, the CBN has said severally that the 2.7 trillion is sitting in people's homes. That is not correct, for goodness sake. This is cash that people are using either for day-to-day transaction or for their day-to-day businesses. How can you say that 2.7 trillion are sitting in people's homes? These are some of the things that is informing this kind of policy, which is not correct. And that is why the CBN has set out to arbitrarily cut the amount of cash in the system. That is what is happening. You have an economy of 250 trillion. We have a cash of 2.6 trillion. That is less than 1.5%. That cash is not too much for an economy of our own size.
Yeah.
It's not too much.
Compared to international standards.
Compared to what you have internationally. Even in Europe, cash to GDP is about 10%. In the United States, cash to GDP is about 9%. I'm saying this because policy must be based on evidence and data. It should not be based on what you feel, or it should not be based on how the spirit leads you. It should be based on data. So if you look at this data, our cash is not too much for it. In fact, we are doing very well. When you look at this ratio, another ratio that you can look at is your cash to money supply. Cash to money supply is 5%. That means that 95% of money is still within the banking system. So if you have a problem of liquidity, it's not the cash that is in the hands of the ordinary people outside. People who are in the formal sector, traders, transport. That is not the problem of the economy. The problem, one of the key problems of liquidity is the ways and means financing that the CBN itself injected into the economy.
More than 20 trillion.
Over 22 trillion. What is 22.7 trillion compared to 2.7 trillion or 2.6 trillion that we are now creating problem about? So we should locate the problems where they are. It is most unfair to subject innocent citizens to the kind of pain, disruption, anguish, anxiety that we have subjected them to in the name of promoting a cashless policy. And you don't promote a cashless policy by sitting on people's money. You drive liquidity even in the normal banking system. When the CBN is starting monetary policy, they don't sit on people's money. The CBN adjusts the CRR, cash reserve ratio. They moved it to 32.5%. And based on that, an estimated 15 trillion naira has been mopped up already from the banking system. And what that is doing is to restrict the capacity of banks to be able to create credit. You can never hear a bank customer go to a bank and they tell him because they have mopped up liquidity, you don't have access to your money. It doesn't happen. So why must we tell the citizens to come for cash swap? They deposited their money, and we now start on the money in the name of cashless policy. Because the evidence before us is that the CBN said it has mopped up 2.1 trillion. The amount that has been printed, at least from what we can see, I'm not sure it's more than 500 billion. Why will you not have a crisis? And is that the way to pursue a cashless policy?
It takes me to the issue of online that you mentioned, and we seem not to have the capacity to, carry out the volume of transactions that we have at the moment, and we see this logjam everywhere where everybody can't even do the online thing. Considering unbanked Nigerians and this online thing, it's a two-way question. What would be their position in all of this? That's the unbanked Nigerians that are suffering this, and of course the issues around online banking. How can we also get that better?
Well, it's about infrastructure. And it's not all payment that should go online.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, of course.
Now, we have an unbanked population of over 30 million people. We have a very huge informal economy. We have a very huge rural economy. For goodness sake, any policymaker should take that into account before jumping into this kind of thing. I was speaking to somebody who sells bread yesterday. And she told me that she sells bread. And people come to her that they want to transfer because they want to buy bread. And she said she doesn't do transfer. That how much is she selling? That she will now take transfer. That if she takes transfer, that's even if she has a bank account. When she now wants to cash the money from POS,
she will pay.
The amount she will pay will be more than the profit she's making from buying the bread. That's why we should be taking transfer. Or if she goes to the ATM, she go and queue from morning till night. Meanwhile, it is the cash she makes from selling the bread that day that she will use to buy the bread for the following day. You can see even at that level how this thing has crippled the business of even a small bread seller. So you don't load everything into online. So that is why we have this congestion. Things that should not be online are going online.
As little as 500 naira,
yes,
200 naira, and people
online.
are transferring it.
So you create a lot of congestion. So it is very important that our policymakers should please think this through properly. They should think it through. So that you don't inflict pain on innocent Nigerians. Because the most painful part of this is that it is the ordinary Nigerians that are suffering the most. The big guys don't need cash.
Yeah.
They don't need it. It's the ordinary Nigerians. And why must we subject them to this kind of thing? So all of these limitations we need to bear in mind in putting in the right kind of policy. And we already have a judgment. And the way it is done all over the world, if you are redesigning currency and changing notes, first, you need ample time for that kind of thing to happen. And that is why in the CBN Act, they said that in changing your currency note, there must be reasonable time given.
Yeah.
Although the Act did not define the time that is reasonable. But if you are dealing with a population of 200 million people, you are dealing with an economy with over 30 million people who don't have bank accounts. You are dealing with a very huge informal sector. You are dealing with a very huge rural economy. If the Act says you should give reasonable time, 3 months cannot be a reasonable time. If in the advanced economies, they are doing 1 year, 2 years, to be able to effect proper cash swap. So all of these things have been based on very, very wrong assumptions. And I hear the CBN say that this will bring down inflation, this will stabilize the exchange rate. There's no connection at all. If what the CBN is thinking is that because we are sat on people's cash, then that is the way to bring down inflation. That has no place in economics. It's like seeking for the stability of the graveyard. You want to kill everybody so that you can have stability. I don't think that is an option. You don't sit on people's money in the name of wanting to bring down inflation or wanting to manage the exchange rate. And the CBN is even the biggest corporate. When you throw in over 22 trillion naira into the economy, what is the business of the innocent Nigerians about the macroeconomic stability that you have now created? So it's most unfair. And if you go by the judgment, my understanding of the judgment is that both the old notes and the new notes should co-circulate until this matter is disposed of. And I will appeal very strongly, both to the president and to the central bank, to please obey the ruling of the Supreme Court. Because we are now talking about rule of law. There is no society that can be stable if there is no respect for the rule of law. And we are not talking about the highest level of political leadership. We need to show example that we respect the Constitution and we adhere to the rule of law. I was expecting that by now the CBN should have issued circulars to all banks. That in line with the ruling of the Supreme Court, they should relax all these conditions. Because all the banks have the old notes. They have them. They should relax it and let people have access to their money. Because nothing can be this unfair and unjust. For you to have money in a bank,
you can't access
and you can't access it. It could even undermine the confidence of the citizens in the banking system. If this had happened between a private company and the citizens, we'll accuse the company of 419.
Yes.
If I quickly go and alert the police, and this man has taken my money, I can't have access to it. Why should it be coming from a regulatory institution such as the central bank? You don't force cashless on people.
Yeah.
It's a voluntary thing.
Dr. Yusuf, this has to be a continuous discussion, honestly, because we need to keep discussing this. The hardship is really, really, really something that we cannot underestimate. It is sad. I must thank you so much for your time. And like I said, there's going to be a part 2 of this discussion very, very soon. Dr. Muda Yusuf is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. They're making sense of the judgment and, of course, issues surrounding that policy. Thank you so much again. And
thank you, Tolu. Thank you.